Hello, you're very welcome to Storytime here with Elga from the Community Library, and it's lovely to have your company, and I hope you're all enjoying sharing different types of books together at home. The lovely thing about having a collection of books at home is that, as well as having individual picture books, touch and feel books, sound books, lift the flap books, pop-up books, there's no end to the range that you can have. Always remember to have a collection of nursery rhymes. These are wonderful for helping your child's memory skills, for helping your child's brain development, and for helping your child to talk. They're great for speech and language. And also have a collection of fairy tales. And that's what I'm going to look at today. You know, fairy tales have been with us for such a long time, passed from one generation to another generation, because in the past many stories were handed down through what was called the oral tradition. So generation after generation told and retold stories, some of the wonderful fairy tales that we have today. And if we think back to the writers of these fairy tales, we had the Grimm brothers, and many of you may be familiar with Grimm's fairy tales. We have, some of my favourites would be, let's see, Cinderella, we had the Elves and the Shoemaker, we had Hansel and Gretel, we had the Golden Goose, and we have Rumpelstiltskin. Those are some of my favourite fairy tales written by the Grimm brothers. But then came that wonderful children's storyteller and writer, Hans Christian Andersen. And I'm sure many of you can share some lovely popular fairy tales that he's written as well. Some of my favourite would be, let's see, The Ugly Duckling, The Emperor's New Clothes, The Little Mermaid, The Tinderbox, and Thumbelina. I think The Ugly Duckling is a wonderful story, nearly one of my favourites of Hans Christian Andersen. And you know, we've tried to keep fairy tales alive. You know, every Christmas we have pantomimes that feature fairy tales and school shows that feature fairy tales as well. But the one that I'm actually going to share with you today is a very, very old fairy tale. It dates right back to about the 10th century. But it wasn't actually written down until the 17th century by a French author. And he was very well known in his day. It was an author called Charles Perrault. And he obviously wrote this fairy tale in French. Le Petit Chaperon Rouge. That's what it was called. It was a European folklore, European fairy tale, and then it made its way into our English language as Little Red Riding Hood. And you know, sharing fairy tales and using props is one of the great ways that we can act out our monthly message this month, which is less watching, more talking, put everything away and just sing, talk and play. And that's what we're going to do today. So, we have our lovely fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood, and I'm going to use props today. So sit back and enjoy this lovely fairy tale that has stood the test of time, and we can pass on to our children from generation to generation. As all good fairy tales begin, once upon a time there was a little girl, and she was called Little Red Riding Hood. Would you like to see her? Well, here she is. Little Red Riding Hood, and she was called Little Red Riding Hood because she has a lovely cape with a red hood. Now, Little Red Riding Hood's a very good girl, and she helps her mummy in the house every day. And she's very, very fond of her grandmother. And she would go to visit her grandmother most days and have lovely walks in the forest with her. Well, this particular day, Little Red Riding Hood was going to visit her grandmother because she was sick. She was lying in bed, and that wasn't like Granny at all. Little Red Riding Hood could remember her granny wearing a lovely dress, lilac and yellow flowers with a matching cap and little gold glasses, and wearing a lovely blue shawl. In fact, she looked just like this. There's her lovely blue shawl, her matching cap, her lovely dress, and her little gold glasses. And Little Red Riding Hood and Granny would go for lovely walks in the forest. Well, today, Little Red Riding Hood thought, I know, I'm going to bring a lovely present to Granny. And that's just what she did. She got a lovely present ready for Granny. And she decided to leave the house and go to Granny's cottage. And her mammy called after her, now, Little Red Riding Hood, you be very careful. Don't talk to anybody and beware of the big bad wolf. And do you know, in the forest, hiding in the trees, there was a big bad wolf. And he would watch and look where Little Red Riding Hood was walking to, especially when she had a little present to bring to grandmother. Well, no sooner had Little Red Riding Hood's mother said that than the wolf appeared in the forest. Would you like to see the wolf? Oh. He is. Look at those sharp teeth. Well, he was watching Little Red Riding Hood, and he thought, I know, if I run ahead of Little Red Riding Hood, I'll get to Granny's cottage first, and then I can go inside the cottage, find Granny's bed, and dress up as Granny. And then when Little Red Riding Hood comes, I'll be able to eat Little Red Riding Hood. Isn't that a very bad wolf? Well, that's just what he did. He was watching very carefully as Little Red Riding Hood was walking ahead to the cottage. And he ran as fast as he could to the cottage. He got to the cottage ahead of Little Red Riding Hood, and he looked in the windows. And he saw Granny's bed. And then he thought, I wonder, is the door open? So he crept very quietly up to the door, and he opened the door. And then he went inside the cottage. when he went inside the cottage, he closed the door again. And he got dressed up as Granny. And then Little Red Riding Hood came along with her present. And she came to the cottage and she knocked on the door. And she looked and she said, "Granny, it's only me, Little Red Riding Hood. I'm coming in now. I'm going to open the door." And she did. She opened the door and she went inside to visit her Granny. Well, as she was making her way into the cottage, here was the wolf, dressed up as Granny. And he went into bed and he just lay there and waited for Little Red Riding Hood to come in. Well, Little Red Riding Hood came over to the bed and she said, "Oh, Granny, I've got a lovely present for you." And she left the present on the bed. And then she came a little closer to Granny and she said, "Oh, Granny, what big ears you have." And the wolf, pretending to be Granny, said, "All the better to hear you with, my dear." And then Little Red Riding Hood, she went closer again. "Oh, Granny, what big eyes you have." And the wolf, pretending to be Granny, said, "All the better to see you with, my dear." And then Little Red Riding Hood went closer again. "Oh, Granny, what big teeth you have." And the big bad wolf, pretending to be Granny, said, "All the better to eat you with, my dear." And with that, he jumped out of bed and he ran to get Little Red Riding Hood, and she screamed as loud as she could. Will you all help me do a big scream to save Little Red Riding Hood? Ah! And Little Red Riding Hood, she ran as fast as she could out of the cottage. And outside, in the forest, there was a woodcutter, and he was cutting wood, and he heard Little Red Riding Hood scream, and he knew exactly what was happening. So when the wolf came outside, the woodcutter fought with the wolf, and that was the end of the big bad wolf. The woodcutter had saved Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood and Granny were all safe and sound. So that is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. It's a wonderful fairy tale, and there's lots more that you can tell your child at home and keep that lovely tradition of fairy tales going. And just as we have stories and we can use props to illustrate those stories, books can stand on their own as well and entertain children for many, many years to come. They're both recreational, they're fun, and they're educational as well. And I just want to finish our story time today with a lovely pop-up book. And this is our story, so we can sing our story song. 1, 2, 3. If you're ready for a story, shout hooray, hooray. If you're ready for a story, shout hooray, hooray. If you're ready for a story, if you're ready for a story, if you're ready for a story, shout hooray, hooray. And our pop-up book today is The Very Clever Crocodile. And it's a peekaboo pop-up book by Jack Tickle. And here we have our crocodile and our dragonfly. And just look what happens when you turn the page of these wonderful pop-up books. Lots of swampy animals are hiding in this book, waiting to pop out at you, so come and take a look. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Piranhas. Beware of the big piranha fish. They're looking for their lunch. Their pointy teeth are very sharp and make a mighty crunch. Look at those sharp teeth. Piranha fish. Now we can turn the page and see our next pop-up. Oh, look at that. Water buffalo. His pointy horns, oh, they look scary, but he's really soft and slow. Who is this dopey giant? It's the water buffalo. Splish, splash. And here's our dragonfly. Whiz. And now we can turn the page. What else is going to pop up? Oh, look. Oh, a crocodile. The Very Clever Crocodile. Crocodile is clever. He creeps up close to you, then gives a cheeky croco smile and jumps out with a boo. And now we can turn the page. What's going to be next? Oh, look. Oh, flamingo. 1, 2, Flamingo and her fluffy friends love dancing every day. They lift their pretty heads up high and practice bird ballet. And they flap and they flutter. Look at their big long legs. Flamingos. And then we turn the page. I wonder what's going to be next. Oh, look! A warthog. Burp, slurp, munch. Warthog and her family just love a muddy lunch. They splash and splosh together as they slurp and burp and munch. I wonder what's going to be next. Let's turn the page. Let's see. Look. Oh, it's Frog. And the dragonflies again. Look who's playing leapfrog with the darting dragonflies. Bouncing on his springy legs, Frog leaps up to the skies. Boing! I wonder what's going to be next. Turn the page. Look. Oh. A pelican. Look at that big, huge beak. And the fish. Pelican loves playing games. She opens her huge beak and all her fishy friends jump in to play at hide and seek. Boo! Splash! And I wonder what'll be next. Chameleon. This tongue. Changing colours. Colourful chameleon looks such a crazy sight. His skin is orange, then turns red, just like a traffic light. The animals splash all day long. It's super swampy fun. Then they snuggle up to sleep beneath the setting sun. So there's a wonderful pop-up book. They're just great books to engage and to communicate with your children, because one sure thing about pop-up books is that they will definitely prompt a reaction and encourage your child to talk to you so much about the different animals. And the same with fairy tales. They will just be engrossed as you tell fairy tales and follow that oral tradition, as well as reading books and sharing books together. So until our next time, that's all we've got time for today. And look after yourselves and enjoy the lovely world of books. Bye bye now. Bye bye.